Have you ever wondered if a swampy, mosquito-infested strip of land is worth mobilizing two state militias and nearly starting a localized civil war? Actually, in 1835, Ohio and Michigan decided the answer was hell yes, and they were willing to kill each other over a map-reading error. The Toledo War wasn't fought over gold, oil, or religion. It was fought because 19th century surveyors were apparently using a broken compass and a dream. At the heart of the dispute was the Toledo Strip, a 468 square mile piece of land that both the state of Ohio and the Michigan Territory claimed as their own. The problem was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which used a line drawn through the southerly bend of Lake Michigan to set the border. Unfortunately, nobody actually knew where the southerly bend of Lake Michigan was, leading to two different border lines, the Harris Line for Ohio and the Fulton Line for Michigan. This created a jurisdictional nightmare where residents weren't sure if they owed taxes to Columbus or Detroit, which is basically the Midwestern version of Sophie's Choice.
Worst Google Maps glitch ever.
By 1835, things escalated from angry letters to "I'm gonna punch you in the cornfield." Ohio's Governor Robert Lucas, a man who took land ownership very personally, passed legislation to extend Ohio's authority over the Strip. Michigan's 23-year-old boy governor, Stevens T. Mason, responded by sending a militia to the border to arrest any Ohioans who tried to perform state-level activities. It was a classic showdown between an established state and a territory that was acting like a teenager who just got his driver's license. The two governors began a game of brinkmanship that involved a lot of marching through mud and very little actual combat, mostly because it's hard to look heroic when you're being eaten alive by wetlands insects.
Puberty hit Michigan pretty hard.
The most action-packed moment of the war was the Battle of Phillips Corners. An Ohio surveying team was out in the field when a Michigan militia unit showed up and started firing shots into the air to scare them off. The Ohioans didn't stay to argue. They turned and ran through the swamp faster than a deer during hunting season. 9 of them were captured and held in a Michigan jail, which Ohio described as a kidnapping by a band of lawless ruffians. In reality, it was a group of guys in muddy boots yelling at each other in the woods. The only actual casualty of the entire war was a Michigan sheriff's deputy named Joseph Wood, who got poked in the leg with a penknife during a tavern brawl.
Stabbed with a pen? 1. Muskets? 0.
President Andrew Jackson was watching this madness from Washington and was losing his mind. He didn't care about the Toledo Strip, but he did care about winning the next election. Ohio was a swing state with electoral votes, while Michigan was just a territory with a loud-mouthed 23-year-old leader. Jackson realized that if he sided with Michigan, he'd lose Ohio and potentially the White House. He fired Governor Mason and told Michigan to sit down and be quiet. It was the ultimate, "don't make me pull this car over" move from the federal government. Michigan was told that if they wanted to become a real state, they had to give up their claim to Toledo and take a consolation prize instead.
Politics, ruining funds since 1776.
The consolation prize was the Upper Peninsula, UP, a massive chunk of wilderness that everyone at the time thought was a frozen, useless wasteland. The people of Michigan were furious. They felt like they were being forced to trade a valuable port city for a giant pile of snow and pine trees. They initially rejected the deal in a meeting called the Frostbitten Convention. But eventually they realized that being a state with a bad piece of land was better than being a territory with no land at all. In 1837, Michigan officially became a state, Ohio got Toledo, and the war officially ended with a grumpy handshake and a lot of resentment.
Worst trade deal in history.
However, the joke was on Ohio. A few years later, massive deposits of copper and iron were discovered in the Upper Peninsula, making Michigan incredibly wealthy and fueling the American Industrial Revolution. The frozen wasteland turned out to be a literal gold mine, while Toledo eventually became, well, Toledo. Michigan got the better end of the deal by accident, proving that sometimes being forced to take the participation trophy pays off, if that trophy is filled with valuable minerals. Ohio got their port, but Michigan got enough copper to wire the entire country.
Ohio won the battle, lost the bag.
The rivalry didn't die with the treaty, it just moved to the football field. To this day, the Ohio State versus Michigan game is one of the most intense rivalries in sports, and its roots go all the way back to 1835. When fans are screaming at each other in the stadium, they're basically channeling the spirit of their ancestors who were hiding in the bushes with muskets over a swamp. It's a 190-year-old grudge that has survived longer than most European monarchies. Every time a referee makes a bad call, a little piece of the Toledo War flares back up in the heart of the Midwest.
Still mad about the penknife.
The Toledo War is a perfect example of how American history is built on a foundation of petty disputes and bureaucratic errors. We like to think of the pioneers as noble explorers, but sometimes they were just guys arguing about where a line should be drawn in the mud. The fact that the federal government had to step in to prevent two militias from shooting each other over a port city shows just how fragile the united part of the United States was in the early days. It's a story of ego, bad maps, and the accidental discovery of wealth.
Check the property lines, kids.
If you visit the border today, there are markers showing the Harris and Fulton lines, and the residents of Toledo are safely Ohioans. The Upper Peninsula is a beautiful vacation spot for people who like flannel and cold water. Everything worked out in the end, but the absurdity of the conflict remains a highlight of 19th century American politics. It's the only war where the primary weapon was a surveyor's chain, and the most dangerous place to be was a tavern in a disputed zone.
Don't bring a knife to a map fight.
Governor Stevens T. Mason, despite being fired, is still remembered as a hero in Michigan, with statues and even a city named after him. He might have been a boy governor, but he had the guts to stand up to the president over a strip of dirt. Ohio's Governor Lucas also got a county named after him, ensuring that both men stayed relevant long after the swamp was drained. It's a classic American ending. Everyone gets a participation trophy and a street name, regardless of how much of a mess they made.
Statues for everyone, no matter what.
So the next time you're driving through the Midwest and you see a sign for Toledo, just remember that people were once willing to die for that exit ramp. And if you're in the Upper Peninsula, take a moment to thank the 1830s politicians who were so bad at math that they accidentally gave Michigan a treasure chest. History is weird, geography is harder than it looks, and the Midwest never forgets a slight.
Toledo, the original mid prize.
The War of 1835 proves that you don't need a high body count to have a legendary conflict. You just need two stubborn governors, a confused surveyor, and a very unfortunate sheriff's deputy. It's a reminder that the borders we take for granted were often decided by who yelled the loudest and who Andrew Jackson liked more that week. It's the most American war you've never heard of.
Next time, just use Waze.
If you enjoyed this absurd chapter of human history, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the top left video to explore another unbelievable historical failure. We'll see you in the next disaster. Thanks for watching.